such as Israel Jacobson, who he saw as recklessly introducing Christian musical forms into Jewish worship, mainly for aesthetic purposes. Quote, without radical reform attempts, he noted, the synagogue would have felt the change of taste and would have immediately produced songs in the classic style, but also in accord with the Jewish traditional genius of synagogue song. But with the abolition of the entire Jewish song, the Jewish spirit was simultaneously forced out, end quote. In contrast, Idelsohn asserted that what he called moderate reform, which included the use of organ in worship, could maintain Jewish tradition as effectively as any other form in Judaism. Quote, the music, from the point of view of its Jewishness, shows no difference by reason of the presence or absence of organ obbligato. There is no more Jewishness in the service by Julius Mambach and Marcus Hast in England, though they are without organ, nor even in the service of the ultra-Orthodox of Frankfurt by Israel Meyer Yaphet, than there is in those of Louis Lewandowski and especially of Emanuel Kirchner, though in these the organ work forms an integral part of the music, end quote. Idelsohn's treatise thereby offered American liberal Jews who were in the process of reforming their own hymnal a constructive path forward. This directive, which he modeled earlier through his own American songbook, as well as 3 original services that set the Union Prayer Book, embraced the Reform movement's music practices as vessels of authenticity, while arguing for a critical, informed, carefully vetted, and systematic reassessment of compositional styles and materials deemed long-standing forms of expression in Jewish life. Idelsohn further attempted to use his book to frame a specific type of American Renaissance of Jewish music. Although he devoted significant discussion to the role of the cantor or chazan as a vessel of Jewish musical tradition through the 19th century, he appeared to stop short of including the cantor in the future of American Jewish musical practice, a philosophy he reinforced in his stated ambition at Hebrew Union College of training musically literate rabbis rather than training cantors. Instead, his discussion of folk song culminated in a call to use what he called authentic Jewish melody to reinvigorate a Jewish art music in the concert hall and synagogue, regardless of the cantor's presence. And Idelsohn continued his book with a chapter devoted, or concluded his book with a chapter devoted to the harmonization of the synagogue modes, presumably as a clinic for those wishing to apply his teachings to their own attempts at revitalizing synagogue music. Together, these aspects pointed to a broadly different vision for Jewish music that placed reform models as the most promising directions for its future development. Jewish music in its historical development became Idelson's most reviewed and publicized work, likely due to its mainstream publisher, Henry Holt. Reviewers unanimously admired Idelson's book, hailing it as pioneering research and lauding its ability to fill a broad gap in musical knowledge. And here I have to acknowledge, both for this and many other things, Eli Schleifer's exhaustive work on the book itself in Volume 5 of Yuval, which helped to present many of the reviews, or at least where they were. Yet each reviewer had its own agenda. The New York Evening Post's Bernard Rogers described the work's, quote, unquestionable authority, and used it to answer what seemed a perplexing riddle posed in the title of his review, quote, a musical race, yet Jews have no Beethoven, end quote. J.B. Trend, writing in T.S. Eliot's journal The Criterion, found Idelson's work valuable for its illumination of pre-Christian musical styles, as well as the connection between Jewish and Arabic tonal systems. Dropsy College's Joseph Reeder and New York Spanish and Portuguese synagogue minister David de Sola Poole welcomed the book's comprehensive coverage and scouring of Jewish sources, with particular emphasis on Idelson's questioning of racial influence and its program for encouraging Jewish, as well as the book's program for encouraging Jewish musical production in the U.S. Robert Lachmann, writing 3 years later in Die Zeitschrift für Musik, wove the work into a dense cross-religious comparison of tone, rhythm, and mode in Jewish music involving the latest scholarship in the area. Now, despite these widely appearing reviews throughout the popular and academic press, Idelson's work ultimately stood as a solitary scholarly monument, used often for extracting melodies, supporting political stances on Judaism, and serving as the token Jewish source for assorted musicological studies, more than for continuing the author's scholarship. Idelsohn, centered in Cincinnati, ended up having little consistent access to the burgeoning New York scene, where emigre members of the St. Petersburg Society for Jewish Music and American-born Jewish music composer activists continued to serve as the voices of Jewish intellectualism and authority. Rather than ponder the issues of race and creativity on a theoretical and ethnographic level, such maturing New York Jewish music scholars as Israel Goldfarb, Abraham Wolf-Binder, and Lazar Saminsky opted for a more simplified, music-fronted approach that appealed to the public on a more pedagogical, sonic level. To these New York-based Jewish musical authorities, performance, rather than theory, would become the most compelling vessel for promoting ideas about Jewish music. Now, Idelsohn would continue to publish and produce past his retirement from Hebrew Union College in 1934. In addition to his other work, he kept trying to publish the next volumes of Toldot HaNeginah, revising Book 3 of his Hebrew manuscript as late as summer of 1933, this according to Schleifer. Idelsohn also continued to view Jewish music as his English work, Jewish Music and its Historical Development, as a work still in development as late as July 1936, when, from his sickbed in Florida, he unsuccessfully attempted to convince Holt to print a supplement with, quote, some exceedingly important additions and corrections, end quote. As his health broke down further, Idelsohn strenuously tried to keep his book in print, seeking purchasers even as a near invalid just months before his 1938 death in Johannesburg, South Africa. Jewish music in its historical development appeared ultimately in 2 editions with Holt, comprising less than 5,500 copies in total. By 1940, the volume had fallen out of print. Henry Holt melted down the plates and sold the remaining unbound sheets, comprising about 1,050 copies, to the Harlem Book Company, which subsequently bound and issued another edition in 1944, and another small edition appeared in 1948 from New York's Tudor Publishing Company. The Schocken Book Company reissued the title in 1967 as the academic Jewish music field began to gain footing as a part of the rising tide, or associated with the rising tide of university-based ethnomusicologists. Subsequent printings by specialty and reprint publishers such as Greenwood Press in 1981 and Dover Publications in 1992, with a new introduction by musicologist R.B. Orenstein, emphasized the book's status as a classic in its field, but also reinforced the field's own relative obscurity. Idelsohn's work, meanwhile, would accomplish nearly the opposite of what he aimed to do in Palestine. His efforts brought academic studies of Jewish music into the hands of an elite group of practitioners and scholars, specifically those who he taught at Hebrew Union College and occasionally his other music colleagues, thus keeping Jewish musical research norms largely within, in this case, a seminary setting for decades. Adhering closely to the core agenda of Reform Judaism at a time when the secular university system largely rejected Jewish studies, Idelsohn's efforts effectively enhanced the value of Jewish music research as a form of religious activism and tied Jewish music study to the amelioration of American Jewish life. Jewish liturgical professionals, rabbinical students, and the faculty of Hebrew Union College, and eventually the emerging new cantors in the post-war period, thereby continued to see Jewish music as a sacred possession with the eternal power of Jewish renewal. In the Yeshuv, as Jim Leffler has argued, Idelsohn promoted the concept of Hebrew music through a dexterous negotiation of Zionism between Europe and Palestine. In America, by contrast, Idelsohn attempted to place Jewish music in a new light by linking his work to the aims of Reform Judaism, a community he found both actively engaged in the intellectual project of American Jewish identity and ready to support him and his ideas, a very important part of his work. Of his reasoning for going there. The fragments and discourses he assembled into his 1929 grand narrative remain a monument to both his erudition and his circumstances, reflecting his dedication to rigorous research as well as to Reform Judaism's contemporary philosophy and image. Yet, Reform Judaism ultimately went in a different direction. Idelsohn's attempts to help revise the Union hymnal at the time went for naught when the committee chose Abraham Wolf-Binder as its musical editor, and not Idelsohn. And the movement's creation of the School of Sacred Music in 1948 through the help of Eric Werner helped revive divisions of synagogue musical hierarchy that Idelsohn had tried to abolish through the training of the musically literate rabbi. Yet while Idelsohn's influence over Reform Jewish musical practice